Thank you guys so much for joining us on WALB News Now. My name is Mackenzie Petrie. Today, Senate Bill 386 passed a state Senate committee which could legalize sports betting. Today, I'm joined by a sports betting analyst, Mr. Jeff, who has all the insight as he's seen legalization processes in multiple states. So, Mr. Jeff, can you just tell me a little bit about this process and what it will take for Georgia to legalize this?
Absolutely. So we have now two pieces of legislation in the Georgia Senate that would legalize sports betting in differing types of ways. The one bill that we saw today move through a Senate committee, SB 386, it would legalize online sports betting in the state through a mechanism with the state lottery. It would allow for multiple online sports betting sites and apps to operate in the state. And that is, both pieces of legislation are really in the early stages of the legislative process, but we are beginning to see them move. And if they are successfully passed through the entire legislature, signed by the governor, then, people in Georgia could be wagering on sports, by the time the Super Bowl rolls around next year.
Got you. So I'm not super into sports betting, but off of my research, this is the first time that it's even passed a state Senate committee, correct?
No, it's these pieces of legislation have made some. They moved through various parts of the legislative process in previous years. We've seen a few years now where lawmakers in Georgia have tried to get a legal sports betting bill passed. In fact, one of the bills in the Senate right now is one that's been revived from last year's sitting, and it's now back in front of the legislature for further review. So we've seen movement in the past, but we haven't actually seen a bill make it all the way to the end zone. We haven't had a legal sports betting bill signed into law yet in Georgia, which is why there is no legal sports betting yet.
See, I'm not the expert here. That's why I need you. Got you. So let's move on to the next question. I see on the AJC that the bill would legalize without requiring a constitutional amendment. Is that legal in the state of Georgia? Because I know that's what's been the discussion over the past couple of years.
Well, that's really the big question, is if that is a thing you can do in Georgia legally. There has been a debate in the past over whether or not you can legalize sports betting in the state without a constitutional amendment. That's what SB 386 is proposing to do by using the lottery, which is already legal in the state, to kind of be the regulator and the licensing entity for legal sports betting, for online sports betting. But the other piece of legislation that is working its way through the Senate right now, that one does envision a constitutional amendment. So you have these two differing visions of how exactly sports betting should be legalized, whether it should be put to the people or whether you can get there through existing mechanisms in the state. It remains to be seen which one, if any, lawmakers will go for, and then how they would withstand the test of time, whether there are legal challenges to whatever bill gets passed. We actually heard some interesting testimony today during the committee hearing. One presenter said that they didn't think that when the Georgia lottery was authorized by voters back in the early 90s, that they were also, people at that time didn't know that they were voting for legal sports betting. So it was an interesting argument. We might hear more like it as the process continues.
See, I'm just learning as I go. I appreciate you so much. This is just helping me out so much. So let's get into how it can benefit the state of Georgia. How have you seen sports betting benefit other states?
Well, the main thing that we see with states when they legalize sports betting is that there is tax revenue and licensing fees that go to the state that are realized when you legalize sports betting. When you set up these mechanisms where companies come and apply to be licensed, they pay their application fees, and then they pay tax on an ongoing basis on their revenue that they collect through sports wagering in the state. The bill that we saw today, it's proposing to tax sports betting revenue now at 20%. It was originally 15%, but there was a friendly amendment. There would also be licensing fees that for as many as 16 online sports betting licenses. So there would be a considerable amount of tax revenue that could be realized. We've seen in neighboring states like Tennessee. Tens of millions of dollars realized in tax revenue since legalization there. So yeah, there is an opportunity for some revenue gains for the state when you go through this sports betting legalization process.
Alrighty. So, how will it work? Will it only be online? Because I know you just touched on the 16 licenses, and I've seen that 5 of them will go to the Atlanta Pro teams, and then 7 to applications, and 3 for golfing, and all these different things. So, how will it work? Will it strictly be online? Would it be in person? What could we expect?
So, Senate Bill 386, what we saw it discussed today, it's a purely online sports betting bill. While you would have entities like the Atlanta Hawks that could get an online sports betting license, they would essentially then turn around and have an entity that is more familiar with offering online sports betting to actually be the operator for them. So they would partner with something like DraftKings or Bet365 or something along those lines to actually run the sportsbook for them. But there are also some standalone licenses that the Lottery Commission could offer up. And if people meet the criteria for licensure, where there wouldn't be that attachment to a professional sports team, where these online sports books could kind of stand on their own and be licensed on their own. Again, of course, the bill has to pass before any of this actually becomes a reality, but you would have only online sports betting in that piece of legislation. The other piece of legislation in the Senate does envision some in-person sports betting opportunities, like a brick-and-mortar sports book where you go into a facility and there's a counter or a kiosk and place a bet. But the bill that we saw movement on today, again, you're right. It's purely online sports betting.
Alrighty, sounds good. So I looked at an article on AJC, and a couple people brought up, that gambling is more like legalized fraud, and they feel that gambling could potentially be bad for some Georgians. Do you think that gambling could maybe go into a problem for some Georgians if they pass this?
Yeah, problem gambling is always a concern when you legalize sports betting because it makes it so much more accessible to people in a state. And you're also going to have entities advertising and putting things out there that might draw people into sports betting that weren't interested in before. So these are always things that have to be taken into consideration when you're legalizing sports betting. And it's something that the bills that are before the Senate, they do have provisions in them related to responsible gambling, requiring operators to have measures in place if people want to set limits on how much they can deposit or wager. SB 386, the bill that moved today, actually bans the use of credit cards and funding an account. So you could only bet with money that you have on hand. You can't borrow to fund your account. So it's definitely something that is a concern. We've seen in other states where they've legalized sports betting, and the gambling helplines in those states have seen an uptick in calls. So whether that's because operators are advertising those helplines and people are becoming more aware of them and taking advantage of them, and how much are people that are seeking help without any of that considered is a bit of it's a bit of a hard thing to parse. But again, responsible gambling has to be a big piece of any sports betting legalization push.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for making some time for me today. With this passing today at the State Senate Committee, I really do appreciate you making some time for me today. Viewers, if you want to continue to follow this story, of course, just tune into WALB.com. And as always, we will have this in our newscast later today at 6 p.m. Thank you guys so much for watching.